Okay, let's start. Okay, welcome again. Peter Walter here, President of WCA. Thank you for joining our event today. Pretty early for the US, it's 9 o'clock here, but it's 6 o'clock in Europe, and the rest of the world is either earlier or later, depends where you are. Today we talk about OpenWifi, the next Wi-Fi revolution, and it is 2021. So probably we have another one in 2022. Let's see what we get. So, why is not the next page? Here we are. So let's start a little bit about the WCA, who we are and what we do. We were founded in 1994, and the Wireless Communication Alliance is a non-profit business league dedicated to collaboration in the wireless industry. It started in Silicon Valley, but now, thanks to Zoom, it's worldwide. Easily spoken, our mission is to networking people. All this effort, what we do, and these events and the sponsoring, what we do is only possible based on our sponsors. Thank you very much, sponsors like Aspel, Google, CIG, Vola, ETI, TFI, and others to sponsor and donate some money so we can get it rolling. Without the sponsorship, we would not be here. We would be broke. We have no income right now because we have virtual events only. So please consider to be a sponsor and donate whatever you can. So if you're an employee and if you like us, please get your checkbook out and write us a check. And if you're an employee and like us also, talk to your supervisor, talk to your boss and say, hey, these guys are great. We need to sponsor them. Upcoming event in November the 18th, we have our flagship event, the 22nd time we will have what's hot and what's not. Where venture capitalists, M&A, and other investors talk about what was great in 2021 and what was not so good, and also the prediction of 2022, everything based on wireless, IoT, and so on. In December, the 16th of December, we will have the global wireless startup pitch event, where startups, European startups actually will get their information all over the world. In general, we have our annual Spectrum 5G event, followed in February by the 6G Spectrum event, 95 gigahertz and above. We will have wireless power transfer in March, and so on and so on. You will see it on our website, wca.org. We are almost there, a little bit to the housekeeping. Please use the Zoom question and answer section. If you have a question, or just press the button, raise hands. The presentation recordings will be available within 48 hours. Greetings to the world again, and thanks for being our guest. And again, if you want to speak or if you want to sponsor, please contact us at sponsor@wca.org. Almost there. And we have, like always, something to raffle on. This time we will give away 5 units of an open Wi-Fi device sponsored by CIG. The product name is WF188N, and it works on Net Experience Network. So we will get also a 1-year license from Net Experience. Thank you so much. You must be present. For the raffle, you will see me again in about 100 minutes for the raffle. And now let's get started. I hand over to the moderator of the Wi-Fi, Open Wi-Fi event, next Wi-Fi Revolution 2021. It's Tom Hunt, managing partner of Axelerix. He is also, by the way, the guy who will accept gratefully your checks and credit cards because he is a treasurer of WCA. Tom is in the business since early 80s. He served in the White House, installing one of the first wireless systems in the White House in Washington. Then he launched many product and projects also in the wireless area. Yeah, welcome, Tom, and I switch over to you. I give you the screen.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome, everybody. It's good to have you joining us. This is our first 9 o'clock in the morning event. For those of you on the West Coast, we apologize. For everybody else in the world, thank you for joining. And we're really excited to welcome you to our first Open Wi-Fi event. Open Wi-Fi was announced by the Telecom Infra Project back in May, and they've seen strong support from hardware, software suppliers, et cetera, bringing Open Wi-Fi solutions to market. In fact, as you heard from Peter, we'll be giving away 5 Open Wi-Fi access points, courtesy of CIG and Net Experience. And so make sure you stick around to win those things later in the event. So today we'll catch up with some of the leaders in Open Wi-Fi and learn about products, use cases, deployments, where the technology and standards are headed. Our panelists are from Telecom Infra Project, Facebook, Boingo, Net Experience, and Atlantis. So enjoy the event. And as Peter mentioned, raise your hand. If you'll see the little hand at the bottom of your screen, or use the chat window for questions. I'll be monitoring them there, and we'll ask our speakers once they finish speaking, and again at the end of the event. So let's get into the agenda. Since Open Wi-Fi is very new, we're going to get an intro, and we're going to get an intro from Chetan Hebele. And Chetan supports the ecosystem of connectivity initiatives at Facebook. In his role as co-chair of the TIP Wi-Fi Solution Group, Chetan and TIP are involved in multiple initiatives to democratize, monetize unlicensed networks, including work on disaggregating Wi-Fi infrastructure and 5G Wi-Fi networking. He'll be joined by Chris Bush. Chris is the co-chair of the Telecom Infra Project Open Convergence Wireless Program. He actively guides an industry group of vendors in an open source disaggregated Wi-Fi solution. Chris has taken an active leadership role in numerous industry positions over the last 20 years. On use cases, we'll hear from Net Experience. And for those of you who don't know, Net Experience is a company which provides the service for the winners today, but they're a company that provides the industry's first end-to-end software platform to control, manage, and automate disaggregated Wi-Fi networks, compatible with Open Wi-Fi. Speaking to us today will be Net Experience's CEO, Bernard Herscovici, as well as Hugh Reese, the VP of Sales and Business Development. They'll be followed by the operator showcase, and that's coming from Boingo Wireless. We have Kishore Raja, the VP of Engineering and Strategy at Boingo and the co-chair of Open Wi-Fi at TIP. Then we'll also hear directly from Kenya and Atlantis. We have Paul Stratham, the regional director, and Atlantis is a CSP and systems integrator located in Nairobi. And then finally, we'll be talking about updates on Open Wi-Fi. Hiran Dur from Facebook's Open Wi-Fi and hardware ecosystem. We'll be joined again by Chris Bush to talk about what's going on in the future of Open Wi-Fi. And so they'll take it more from the hardware perspective. And so without further ado, I would like to kick things off and hand things over to Chetan and Chris. So Chetan.
Thank you, Tom. Hi, everyone. Welcome. And before we launch, I wanted to thank Tom and the team at WCA for giving us this wonderful opportunity to share with all of you this really transformative movement that is happening in the Wi-Fi industry. As Tom mentioned, we launched our Open Wi-Fi publicly to the market sometime in May this year. And since then, we've seen a tremendous uptick in interest from vendors and from ISPs and from system integrators and managed service providers, all very interested in wanting to trial the equipment and wanting to see what Open Wi-Fi is all about. So before we sort of get into that part of it, I want to sort of, for the audience that isn't familiar with Telecom Infra Project, I want to take you through a small introduction. So just a quick intro. I'll talk a little bit briefly about the Telecom Infra Project before handing over to my colleague Chris Bush to take us through the vision and the promise and where we are with OpenWifi today. So for those of you not familiar with OpenWifi and TIP, TIP is a nonprofit foundation, was founded in 2016, where we have literally well over 1,000 companies in the system, and was founded by a core group of mobile network operators and technology companies like Intel and Facebook. That's sort of the genesis of where TIP started. And really, the agenda of TIP was very simple. It's to take a look at the telecom infrastructure across the world, regardless of technology, and bring a collaborative ecosystem approach to solving problems. So sometimes the community as a whole is much better in a position to solve these problems than any one individual company. And so one interesting thing about TIP that we all truly appreciate is that it's focused on solving real-world problems with a sense of urgency. So TIP is not so much about writing up new standards. We leave that to the folks at IEEE or the ITU or the 3GPP bodies. What we're more interested in is solving problems, bringing solutions to the market. So we work at that intersection between standards, market requirements, and what the industry needs as a whole to really increase the spread of connectivity technologies, lower the cost of these technologies, and make them much more affordable, much more ubiquitous, so that that this connectivity spreads globally and spreads in a very sustainable manner. So with that, I'm going to pause here for a minute and hand over to my colleague Chris Bush to take us through what is OpenWifi, the vision, the promise, and where we are with the OpenWifi ecosystem. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Chetan. Appreciate that. So folks, we'll grab the screen share back and hopefully we're good to go. Hopefully everyone is seeing a full screen image right now.
We can, Chris. Thank you.
Fantastic. So thanks, Chetan, and thanks again, Peter and Tom from WCA for having us together here today. I think as Chetan just mentioned, there's been some fantastic uptake of a variety of telecom infra project solutions over the years since TIP was established some time back. Specifically speaking in Wi-Fi terms, the overall Wi-Fi initiative at TIP was established back in Q4 of 2019. Today, the group is co-chaired by Facebook, Deutsche Telekom, and Boingo as the Open Converge Wireless Project Group. And TIP Open Wi-Fi's goal, I think as Chetan also mentioned, right, has been to really break that sort of vendor lock-in approach through disaggregation architectures, having open APIs, common embedded software and management plane that's both community and commercially supported, as we'll see here today in this session. Available for consumption as a completely open source reference, vendors may easily adopt TIP Open Wi-Fi platforms. This could be either as a complementary addition to hardware offers in current portfolios, or as an entirely TIP Open Wi-Fi based hardware and software offer as a full stack, as it were. Operators may certainly also consume the community project as a complete solution and extend around the software stack based on each individual design goal, or use only the components that are desired for deployment. Open Wi-Fi's community, as again we'll see today, includes hardware ODM vendors, various software DevOps teams, OEMs, and tremendous system integrators. And again, speaking from the TIP project group perspective, for Open Wi-Fi, our North Star in the initiative was really to disaggregate and break apart that vendor lock-in that so commonly follows with advanced managed Wi-Fi systems that tend to use controllers to manage subscriber services specifically. Something key at the beginning of TIP Open Wi-Fi that we looked into was, so how could we take this model of sort of that premium managed WLAN experience, and could we permit that to scale at service provider levels and deliver a secure firmware and cloud management stack as a community that's both open source and with commercial support? And so we now see that operators are beginning to embrace this capability in TIP Open Wi-Fi and can deliver the same solution, whether that's in enterprise class Wi-Fi use cases, premium small, medium business markets, or even create derivative solutions that might even tackle different challenges in certain residential use cases. So it really is showing its flexibility as a disaggregated architecture. Again, pivoting back to, you'll hear us say this a lot, that vendor lock-in for a moment. Most Wi-Fi systems revolve around a vendor interface and or vendor-defined schema. And these systems typically do not permit, therefore, other vendor devices to work within the same management and control system structure. This adds layers to the operator back office and then essentially duplicates vertically management and operations from the Wi-Fi network operator perspective. So TIP Open Wi-Fi's disaggregated architecture really works to ensure that there's choice in the solution, both end-to-end and from cloud to ground. And really, TIP Open Wi-Fi being open source is just one aspect about being open in managed Wi-Fi terms. With the data model and interface in the open, our APIs are in the open. In fact, the community project group has contributors from across the globe at both the embedded device firmware and also at the cloud SDK level today. And just to reemphasize, we continue to ensure choice, not just in device, but also in cloud. And TIP Open Wi-Fi solution permits operators to change their cloud provider from one managed service to another, or from a managed service, perhaps even to their own on-premises self-managed model. There simply is no lock-in at any level of the Open Wi-Fi design. So with that, let's come back to Chetan, who can tell us a little bit more about the ecosystem that's really built up around TIP Open Wi-Fi today. Chetan?
Thank you, Chris. So as you can see, especially in the last 1 year that the group has been in operation, we've seen a very global interest from across the board, both in terms of the people in the ecosystem, all the way from folks like Qualcomm, MediaTek at the chipset level, ODMs like CIG and others, as well as software vendors like NetExperience and others, all coming together with one goal, and that is to bring more innovative solutions to the market, increase the pie, if you will, of the market. And what's very interesting about this ecosystem is that it's a global movement. It's not necessarily in any one particular region of the world. On the supply side, we've got all of these folks who really want to see the ecosystem develop in ways that in some sense mirror 3GPP with the ability to interoperate between systems. And then on the demand side, we've seen folks like Vodacom, Deutsche Telekom, who are one of the co-chairs of the Wi-Fi Solution Group, Boingo, who are one of the co-chairs of the Open Converged Wireless Group, coming together to sort of expand the ecosystem and create that voice of the service provider, if you will. And what's more interesting for telecom infra project in particular is that with folks like Boingo, we're sort of breaking new ground with the managed services provider, joining hands with operators to really look at technologies across the board and see how best they can create economies of scale and really accelerate the spread of this kind of what you might call as plug and play or mix and match systems, where products from one vendor can interoperate with products from another vendor. Next slide, please. So just recently, we were very pleased to announce that two of our partners, NetExperience, who will be presenting on this webinar, as well as HFCL, one of our other partners in Asia, teamed up together, and their entry for social Wi-Fi was picked up by the WBA, and they were shortlisted for the WBA 2021 awards. To us in TIP, I think this is sort of a coming of age. It's a recognition, if you will, of from a really powerful arm in the industry that there is momentum, there's growing recognition that this is happening. And now with the WCA complementing that, I think we're going to start to see TIP Open Wi-Fi show up in more categories, and really sort of some of these use cases will start to get more fleshed out in 2022. Next slide, please. So with this slide, I'd like to, before we transition off, I'd like to sort of, if you will, reveal the tip of the iceberg. This is just the beginning. we're very pleased to announce that some of our vendors, including CIG here, EdgeCore, NetExperience, and others, are all very active in the field. And while we would have loved to announce our deployment in Africa, where CIG and NetExperience are active partners, unfortunately, we were held up by some logistics, so we had to hold that back for just a week or two. So please stay tuned for that. We'll be back announcing a public deployment in Africa very soon. And then, as you can see here, the gamut of use cases really runs across the board. You've got EdgeCore networks in Taiwan who've spearheaded the deployment in the university campus. So that's a campus study. And then you've got partners in India who've teamed up to provide public Wi-Fi, really testing the robustness, stability, and sort of the cost competitiveness of tip open Wi-Fi based solutions here. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. On a subsequent webinar, we'd love to come in and talk more about our deployments. And of course, you're going to hear much more stories on deployments coming up from some of our partners here on the webinar as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. One last word here. One of the things that TIP does is we demonstrate our commitment to the community by having labs globally across the world. And so as you guys get more involved in TIP, as you're more interested in seeing what Open Wi-Fi is about, we'd love to partner with you. We'd love to run even lab tests and trials. And so we're really working at that intersection of R&D advancement and field deployment. And that's what makes TIP unique. So if you do get interested, do get in touch with us or get in touch with our friends at WCA, and we'd be happy to talk to you offline more on that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chet.
Chetan and Chris, thank you so much. That was very informative, especially for those folks who don't really have any familiarity with Open Wi-Fi. A couple of quick questions. I'll leave it to you guys who answers. But Facebook obviously has been very involved in this space, and I think about Facebook and Wi-Fi. How does Open Wi-Fi differ from previous Facebook initiatives like Express Wi-Fi?
Mike, maybe I can take that and
sure
add some thoughts on his as well. So Facebook has been involved in a number of initiatives. Like you mentioned, Express Wi-Fi is a over-the-top service that Facebook designed originally to solve the Wi-Fi monetization problem for service providers. And it was specifically targeted at the emerging markets where connectivity was either poor or non-existent. And so this was a way to make Wi-Fi networks self-sustaining with captive portal services and analytics on usage and helping operators create Wi-Fi plans and market those plans. And that's a product out of Facebook. Open Wi-Fi, on the other hand, is completely different. Our involvement in Open Wi-Fi is not as Facebook, the company, so much as Facebook, the supporter. Chris can add more details there, where he and others actively drive Open Wi-Fi development. And we're really looking here as a community involvement. So we're invested more in getting the snowball started, if you will. But it's not a product from Facebook, technically. It's an output of the Telecom Infra project, and everybody's welcome to join hands with us and steer the ship.
Yeah.
Chris, if you want to add.
I would only add, I think that's really well said. And just to add for clarity, Tom, and for the community here today, that Open Wi-Fi, exactly as that independent platform architecture, as it were, carries a number of different subscriber onboarding, captive portal, user experience capabilities with it today. Whether that's the support for a number of third-party hotspot integrations. A great reference there is work that's going on in PM1 turns in India at the moment, to also having, right, coincidentally, feature support to enable Express Wi-Fi to also deploy on TIP Open Wi-Fi. The platform really is there to be consumed, right, by both the ecosystem in whole, as well as by vendors who would seek to bring forward commercial solutions on top of it.
Thank you, guys. That's good clarity for our audience. And as you might imagine, you see some interesting names like Deutsche Telekom or Facebook associated with Open Wi-Fi. So sometimes it's this line that people just don't quite understand. So thanks for clearing that up. Another question relative to the operator space. Many operators deploy residential class Wi-Fi for their home subscribers. What role does Open Wi-Fi play there?
I think today the world of residential Wi-Fi is largely defined probably by the end subscriber need. And so how do you measure a residential service is typically based on obviously the use cases that an individual customer will drive to their respective operator. And those will be around number of connected devices in the home, the ability to have range and reach challenges met inside the home, but they're not looking to solve for, let's say, density of subscriber devices to a single access point, for example, or more than likely any of the more advanced network topology and protocol type conversations that come with, well, typically the premium enterprise type market. What's very interesting is that Open Wi-Fi brings with it essentially a stack that offers flexibility to both ends of the spectrum. And so it's nimble enough that while it carries all of those premium enterprise features, it's compact in nature that it can actually be created into a derivative use case in the residential market if that's an end desire for the operator. And I think there could be pluses and minuses as to what might influence an operator's decision in that regard. So that's probably a different topic for another day. But we find it interesting on the TIP Open Wi-Fi side that you can indeed have that flexibility across the spectrum of feature, and you could evolve a residential solution out of the same stack that's capable of bringing forward a service provider or enterprise or venue type Wi-Fi solution.
Thanks, Chris. We have some more questions, but we'll come back to those at the end of the event. And right now we're going to transition from Chris and Chetan to talk use cases, a little bit on use cases. And as you can see on the screen, we have our friends from NetExperience, Bernard and Hugh, to talk about use cases and lessons that they've learned over this period of time. So, Bernard, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. So, what we had was an excellent overview of Open Wi-Fi, which is this amazing initiative, part of Telecom Infra Project, which, by the way, does all kinds of projects in different parts of the networking space, not only in Wi-Fi. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at what would a commercial platform look like based on Open Wi-Fi architecture, and I'll be speaking about that for a few minutes. And then my colleague Hugh is going to go into what are the use cases we see short-term and medium-term in the market, what are the lessons learned from our initial engagements with service providers. As Chetan mentioned a few moments ago, one of the big benefits of this initiative is the fact that it's driven by major customers, which kind of like rallied together and described their pain points, described their needs, which led to the way forward, which we are bringing now to the market. So a little bit about NetExperience. We're the software company. We're part of the open source side of it, but also I'm speaking today from the perspective of our commercial platform for service providers. So building on the foundation, which is open source, which is very powerful on its own, we add everything related to additional features, additional capabilities, full commercial product, testing with multiple hardware vendors, software support, integration services, and so on. And since Open Wi-Fi is really a global initiative, the engagements are with flagship service providers on a worldwide basis. So they would be pretty much everywhere. So no particular order. There are many projects with high volume emerging in Africa, in India, in other parts of Asia, in South America, especially in Brazil. We have good traction in Europe with some service providers, and of course, domestically in US, and of course, Boingo, who is one of our partners here on this presentation, has been at the forefront of open Wi-Fi for a long time. If you look at the platform, like a commercial platform based on open Wi-Fi, from one point of view, it's no different than what we had before, but there are some major differences. And the major differences are bringing the capabilities forward. One is it's one platform which is compatible with multiple hardware vendors. So ActionTech, which sources from a company called CIG, but now it's selling as ActionTech, is one of our partners in many projects, as there are others. And we're doing testing with all their models and versions of access points. The second difference is it's one platform for multiple use cases. Many times, a service provider delivering Wi-Fi services, they would have to source one type of Wi-Fi system, perhaps a very high-end one for certain type of deployments, but maybe a mid-range one for maybe hospitality, maybe a more budget-oriented one for SMBs and so on. Because open Wi-Fi, it's an architecture, it allows one platform now to serve multiple use cases. Those use cases extend quite a bit. So at one end, you can have things like, high-end enterprise or universities or stadiums, which are very demanding from a Wi-Fi perspective. At the other end of the spectrum, you would have things like MDUs, apartment buildings, which have their own challenges from the perspective of cost, which obviously has to be quite low. But in the same time, from a Wi-Fi perspective, they operate in an environment which is super dense. So they require certain capabilities and features normally associated with enterprise systems. So that's a very, very big plus of the initiative itself, the fact that it can support multiple use cases. The fact that it's...
Bernard, I just noticed, I don't think your slides are advancing. Are you advancing the slides?
I am advancing the slides.
I'm still seeing slide 1.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So I think, okay, very good. Thanks for letting me know. So to recap, it's the same architecture, but it's one platform for multiple hardware vendors, one platform for multiple use cases. It's a low TCO, low total cost of ownership. And that includes the upfront cost, which is typically called CapEx, but also the operating cost, which is OpEx. So blended together into the total cost of ownership compared to the other, existing solutions, we expect something like 60% reduction. Obviously, that makes it very appealing in certain parts of the world where the service cost or the service price does not allow purchase of very expensive equipment. But also it's very good because many service providers operating on Wi-Fi, they have budgets which are constrained themselves. So cost is a very, very big deal. In our case, we're offering our platform both as a software as a service, but in some situations, what we found is our customers would like to license it. So, for example, if there is let's say it's a large service provider opportunity in a part of the world, and they are concerned about perhaps integration with other parts of the back office, or they want to make sure the data stays in their country, or they just want to be the ones operating the stack. We're offering the opportunity for them to license the whole package, and they become the master of their own destiny. And kind of like related to that, it's a platform which is rich in APIs, because OpenWifi and the platforms they call OpenWifi, in turn, they have to be open to many other software applications which are sideways or northbound or southbound, allowing richer and richer end-to-end solutions for service providers. Going a little bit, and that's about as deep as I would go on the technical side, is it shows how commercial companies like NetExperience can build on a very strong open source capability or platform. So the software residing in the access point, which is very rich in features, it's pretty much open source. There is another component, which is a mediation layer on the cloud, which is called the Cloud SDK. It's also open source, belonging to the community, and that's a part that Chris and Chetan described. But the API nature and the open source nature now allows somebody like us to go and build on top of it. So we build, for example, one of the parts that we build is a full-fledged wireless LAN controller, which is, automated channel, automated cell sizing, client steering, and all the kind of like features which are needed in a modern wireless LAN controller. The other part that we've been building on top of the OpenWifi core, so to speak, is a service provider grade management system, which has configuration profiles, it has upgrade managers. In general, the workflow and capabilities associated with managing many use cases and large networks. And then a number of other kind of like modules capabilities. One of them I'm going to mention here. I don't have the time to go into all of them, but I'm going to mention open roaming, which we see a very, very good future capability, just like OpenWifi. Open roaming is driven by WVA, and it's a way to allow roaming between Wi-Fi networks. OpenWifi and open roaming interoperate, and we've done a lot of work with flagship service providers in the area of that compatibility. And we see that in many, many discussions with many customers. Aside from that, there will be linkages to many other capabilities, such as Express Wi-Fi from Facebook and many others. Security is very important. Flow of operations is very important. For example, giving various roles to various users of the platform and so on. As I mentioned, we're offering a full commercial product, but there is a support which starts from a trial, which can be a free trial, going to a bigger trial, going to integration support, commercial support, and so on. And if there is a need, also some integration and customization. And to wrap up my side is I'm going to recap a little bit the benefits of OpenWifi in a commercial platform, which is riding on OpenWifi. What does that bring to service providers in Wi-Fi business? They have the ability to really collapse 3 or 4 different Wi-Fi platforms into one, which has big benefits in simplified management, CapEx and OpEx. They have the ability to deal with multiple hardware vendors. And today, with the shortages of everything, supply of access points is not given. It's actually not easy to get enough supply. So having some diversity, it's very useful. It's not only a cost issue, it's also a supply issue. It's also an innovation, because we see some of the hardware vendors are becoming extremely innovative at putting additional features and differentiation. Network automation, we're employing, like, for example, our channel planning is using certain algorithms which use AI and so on, and we'll be building a little bit more on that based on some partnerships we have with some universities. The SaaS or license platform the support of open roaming, I believe, is going to be extremely important. And in the end, last but really not least at all, it's really a lower cost solution, both from a hardware cost and in general CapEx and then OpEx. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Hugh, who is managing all the customer activities, business development, and is going to go into our lessons learned and so forth. Hugh.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, what I'll do is talk about some of the early adoption of Open Wi-Fi, the types of service providers that we're seeing adopting Open Wi-Fi, the vertical markets that they are addressing, some examples from around the world, and some of the business models they're using, and of course our business model. And as Bernard mentioned, really some about the ecosystem itself and some of the lessons that we've learned as we've started to do these deployments. If you could go to the next slide. So the types of service providers that we've seen, adopting this initially, there are many that are in process, but the ones that have kind of moved forward more quickly are the sort of are quite varied. But the probably the first category of those would be what I would call whoops, I seem to have lost the slide. There you go. Wi-Fi focused service providers. So these would be folks like Boingo, and of course Kishore is going to talk about what Boingo is doing in Open Wi-Fi. Also, we found the developing countries in particular are very anxious to look at this technology and deploy this technology. Primarily because, of course, they see the benefits associated with the lower costs associated with deploying this type of solution. Bernard, you seem to have switched back to the. Okay, there you go. The developing, because of the lower costs associated with this type of solution. And then lastly, but not least, of course, ISPs around the world, managed service providers around the world, who are also looking to improve the cost, but also improve the manageability of multiple customer deployments. Next slide. So there are three kind of key vertical markets that we're seeing being served initially by these service providers, these early adopter service providers. The first is public Wi-Fi. This is, the hotspots, both indoor and outdoor, but especially a lot of outdoor. I think some of this is being, to be honest, is being driven a little bit by the fact that a lot of events and things are being done outside as opposed to indoors in the past because of the COVID situation. And I know that that Paul will talk about this in Lance's deployment in Africa, and that's certainly one of the criteria that they had. The second, and also applying to Paul, coincidentally, is education. Colleges and universities across developing countries are looking to deploy this technology and seem to be early adopters, running not just lab trials, but running field deployments and field trials, and presumably therefore going on to running full-scale deployments. And hospitality is probably the third one that we see. This isn't necessarily applicable to the developing countries. In fact, this is really the developed countries that we see a demand on the hospitality side. And then I think moving forward in 2022, later in 2022, we've seen a couple of things starting to emerge. One would be sort of more of the larger scale enterprise customers. We think they're a little bit slower adopters, and so it's going to take a little while. I think they will wait and see and look at the success and the successful deployments before moving forward. And then another one that we're seeing definitely significant interest, and I think there was a question about this earlier, was how moving into the residential space. There are some specific hardware manufacturers that manufacture for the residential space that are anxious to kind of develop and release open Wi-Fi tip compatible products. Next slide. And a couple of examples, and the third one I'll let Paul speak about, which is first of all, French company that's primarily involved in hospitality. They're effectively a Wi-Fi ISP. Their real need was a scalable solution that's easy to manage. And they like the aspect of the fact that it's cloud managed. They're looking to deploy a variety, or in the process of deploying a variety of AP types. They certainly, because it's in a developed country, they're looking for the sort of wall mount, small form factor AP specific for hotel rooms. But of course, their hotels have other convention spaces, they have meeting spaces, they have need for general APs of different types. So there's a lot of different types of APs that they're interested in deploying and are in process of deploying. And they run effectively a relatively low margin business. I think running hospitality Wi-Fi is a pretty tough market. So low CapEx and OpEx are key drivers for them. A second example I would name is an ISP in Brazil who are trialing open Wi-Fi right now, primarily to serve areas that are not well served by 4G, 5G. So this is a really interesting use case because it really goes back to one of the keys that Bernard had mentioned earlier, which is the use of open roaming in conjunction with open Wi-Fi. So the idea, of course, is that the end customers, the end users, will roam through that network if they have a 5G provider, a 4G, 5G cellular provider, and then they hit the Wi-Fi network. The Wi-Fi network will automatically carry that data on behalf of that 4G, 5G cellular provider, and we're using the open roaming credentials, which means from the end user perspective, you don't have the need to put in a username and password. It's just a seamless transition from one network to the other. And that is a key requirement because at least the Brazil in particular seems to have this requirement. They seem to have poor coverage in some areas, and they just are not able to scale that up quickly with the 4G, 5G, but they can scale it up pretty quickly with the Wi-Fi access. And then the third one I'm not going to talk about because that's Paul's. Paul is going to talk about the university in Kenya. Next slide. So the business models, really, that's the first couple are like the business models of the of our customers, and then the last one is our business model. The most of these service providers are using some kind of either captive portal or way to authenticate users so that they can serve them with some package that it becomes, as Chetan mentioned, a kind of self-sustaining. But the charges that they're able to offer based on open Wi-Fi are significantly less than they have been able to do in the past. So it's really this whole open Wi-Fi initiative is really growing the size of the pie, not just taking market share, but growing the pie significantly, which I think was one of its primary goals. And it's certainly, from my perspective, I think, we're seeing these opportunities in all around the world, in many, many developing countries in particular, which shows that the model is resonating with them. I say most people are using captive portals. That exception is that Brazilian ISP, which is using open roaming for authentication, and this has gone very well. The testing has gone very well, and we're expecting this to be a much more widely adopted technology in 2022. And then our business model, as Bernard mentioned, we're primarily a SaaS provider. In fact, all our customers currently are on a SaaS basis. However, we do have that licensing model for larger scale service providers. People are looking to deploy hundreds of thousands of APs. They are much more interested, I'd say, in the moving over time from the SaaS model into that license model, instantiating all of the software in their own data centers. And the last slide. So some of the key points on the ecosystem itself and some of the lessons that we've learned. I think the first one is that it's critical for us to work very closely with the AP vendors, and we do. I know that Tom would probably attest. We are very diligent in terms of making sure that we independently verify all the AP and AP variants and software variants that they come out with at CIG to verify that those APs are not just TIP compatible, which of course TIP can certify that, but we also verify them independently to make sure they really do work well with our net experience solution, and they can be fully supported, and that they are suitable for real life deployments. And we do that every day. The second thing is, and this is really amazing from my perspective, never seen anything like this, and maybe Paul can say a few words on this as well, but the TIP community itself is absolutely invaluable in providing resources to support new potential customers. They have a massive knowledge base, real experts, and of course, they're the open source repository, technical knowledge, and helping to develop feature priority is absolutely invaluable to the customers that I've seen so far. The third aspect is on support. What we found is that Net Experience fundamentally needs to become the de facto support organization for the entire solution. And this makes sense because 99% of the issues that we run into are software, not hardware related. So we take support for the entire solution. And then the last but not least, that we've mentioned many times, is the pricing needs to be aggressive, and it is. And this will, as I say, really grow the pie for Wi-Fi and not just slice off a piece of market share.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you very much for the presentation. A couple of quick questions for you. I think one of the slides we may not have seen, a question came from the audience. Which cloud platforms does the OpenWifi controllers currently work on?
Yeah, so right now we're working on AWS, so on Amazon. But the solution is designed in a way which is easily portable to Azure or other cloud providers, or also on OpenStack. And we have at least one very large customer right now, which is going on the OpenStack direction. But the SaaS service itself, when we provide it, it's based on Amazon.
Got it. Thank you, Bernard. Another question that came in has to do with, where Net Experience is adding functionality. Is it value on top of the Open Wi-Fi plumbing, or are you offering Open Wi-Fi as cloud as a service / license?
Yeah, so from a design perspective, what we're doing is we're designing capabilities which ride on top of Open Wi-Fi. But when we sell it to a customer, we package everything together into a one SaaS service or one licensed product, which includes the open source and our own contribution in the software into one kind of standalone platform.
Thank you, Bernard. And we'll have questions, I'm sure, at the end for both you and Hugh. And thanks for presenting. Next agenda item is to talk about the operator showcase. And for that, we have Kishore from Boingo. Kishore, it's over to you.
All right. Thank you, Tom. And greetings, everybody. So let me start by sharing my slides. Okay. Can you guys see the slides?
We can.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Greetings again. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. So I'm going to be talking from a service provider and an operator perspective, talking about a few use cases and what kind of journey we have gone through OpenWifi, as well as the various Wi-Fi and different types of deployments we've done in the past. So start with the introduction, a quick overview of Boingo Wireless. So we are the largest Wi-Fi operator. We have many, many thousands of nodes deployed worldwide. We are also the largest DAS operator with more than 42,000 nodes. And we have media and advertisement platforms. And of course, we deploy in the military bases, close to about 85 bases, US as well as abroad, where the US military bases are. And the key thing I want to mention from Boingo's perspective is our goal is to take the concept and bring it into a market. That concept can be anything. It can be in Wi-Fi, it can be in a commercial DAS, a CBRS. So as you can see in the bottom part of the slide, we deployed the first Wi-Fi passpoint network back in 2014 in Chicago O'Hare. We had our first CBRS network in 2018 in Dallas Love Field. And then we also had the first Wi-Fi 6 network in John Wayne here in Southern California. So obviously, we would like to continue to do that with the concept of Open Wi-Fi 2. Now, these are all the venues. Most of the venues are large, iconic venues. That's where we have our presence. Venues like prominent airports like LAX and JFK and John Wayne here in Southern California, and many more throughout the country, including some iconic venues like the One World Trade Center, the Rockefeller Center, then sports arenas like State Farm Arena in Atlanta, the NFL Chicago Bears Stadium, of course, in Chicago, and Smart Home Arena like the Vivint one in Salt Lake City, and of course, several concert venues, Live Nation concert venues, several dozens of venues throughout the nation, coast to coast. And just to recap and highlight Boingo's technology portfolio. So as you can see, we have a whole bunch of technologies that we work and deploy, and everything from Wi-Fi, passpoint and offload. We also deploy IPTV in the military bases, of course, DAS and small cells. And we are in the process of deploying CBRS 3.5 gigahertz. That's mostly private networks, deploying CBRS with the operators. And then open roaming. Bernard talked about open roaming. So there's a whole bunch of initiatives we have on open roaming. And we also sit actively as part of Wireless Broadband Alliance. So we're one of the initial companies along with Cisco to start open roaming with WBA. And now I'm going to share some more as I go through the slides. And of course, we are working on virtualization of the infrastructure. vRAN, like virtual RAN, open RAN, and things like what's going on from an IEEE standards, 3GPP Release 16 standards, which is licensed and unlicensed from a 5G NRU perspective. Okay, that should highlight a bit about Boingo. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what does Boingo provide and where Wi-Fi and Open Wi-Fi comes into play. So at Boingo, we provide a neutral host service. Now, what exactly does it mean? It means what you see in this particular slide. We have a partnership with a variety of industry players. We are technology and vendor agnostic. So for us, it doesn't matter what wireless technology, as long as it solves a particular use case. It could be in private networks. It could be a Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E. It could be IoT in LoRa. So we stay technology agnostic, as well as from a vendor perspective. We work with more than 60 or 65 vendors across the ecosystem, as you can see. And so we try to stay agnostic from that perspective, because we don't believe one size fits all or one solution fits all. And given the breadth of verticals we have, it makes sense to partner across the ecosystem. And then the last thing I want to highlight here is in the bottom part of the slide, same thing from a wireless infrastructure perspective. As I mentioned before, we have deployed Wi-Fi passpoint. We are in the process of deploying Wi-Fi 6 and 6E, private networks, small cells, towers, and many of these are forming a global digital infrastructure and ecosystem. All right. The other value of having a neutral host, especially for public networks, less for private networks, is really, it reduces costs by sharing the resources and the infrastructure. And I'm going to spend some more time talking about this with specific examples, how it enabled us to have a common infrastructure, by virtualizing and containerizing, and how that helped us to propel deploying multiple technologies. And obviously, it drives revenue opportunities because you have more room and more ways of deploying things and faster way of deploying things. Focuses on convergence for flexible deployment. One of the key things, if you look at the industry, the architecture and the specifications are becoming flexible, meaning you're getting into flexible architecture from a RAN side, from a core side, from a transport side. So same thing when you go into convergence and co-integration, there's a lot of flexibility we are seeing. And of course, many other benefits from, helps maximize carrier participation. We have a whole bunch of relationships with all the carriers, tier 1 and tier 2 carriers here in US. And there's a lot of benefit we have from having a converged infrastructure. And one slide to highlight the different protocols and what kind of things we connect from a protocol perspective, like Zigbee, LoRa, then BLE, and many of these. And last but not least is really the use cases. These technologies are only as good as the use cases they solve. We have cameras deployed in airports and many of the venues that require a private secure network, and we've used private networks for that. We've also used Wi-Fi networks for many of those deployments, maintenance, HVAC, building automation, IoT, and fan experience in the stadium, so on and so forth. So that hopefully gives an idea and sets the premise for the type of services that we have deployed, and then jumping into Wi-Fi and OpenWifi. Okay. All right. So I'm going to jump straight into network infrastructure, how the network infrastructure has evolved at Boingo, and how that allowed us to get into OpenWifi because of this evolution. So one of the things that I always talk about, if some of you have seen my presentation, you would be familiar with this slide and with this analogy. So running the wireless network at an airport, like the ones we manage, is like running the network at Super Bowl every single day. And you can imagine, Super Bowl goes on for a day, about 6 to 8 hours, including, the pregame get together and party. And it's just a lot of activity, uploads and downloads. And this is pretty much what we go through on every single day on all of our venues combined. Several tens of terabytes of data, different types of infrastructure, about 400,000+ nodes. And these are routers and gateways and access points and small cells and towers, and managing them and automating them. So making sure that having a converged view of the infrastructure is really key for us. And one of the first things we did about 6 or 7 years back is we started to virtualize the individual network functions like DNS, DHCP, a router, gateways, EPC functions on the cellular side. Now we're working on 5G, NGC functions. And if you look at the evolution of virtualization, if you see on the right-hand side top, it kicked off with compute, storage, and databases. Most of us are familiar and very actively involved with the cloud infrastructure, be it a public cloud or a private cloud. And compute, storage, and databases are virtualized. So you can just literally go and create an instance without having to set up anything. So that's the birth of the cloud on the private and the public side. And then the concept of containers started with Docker taking the leap and the lead, creating virtualized operating system environments. You can write an application for one OS and then have the whole containerized environment and deploy across multiple platforms. And of course, that got into the concept of networks via network function virtualization and software-defined networks, basically virtualizing individual network functions, creating them as VNFs. And then, of course, containerization became more and more popular. Open source APIs for containerization, the concept of orchestration and deployments. And last but not the least, this is the exciting part for me, coming from both telecom and the software world, 3GPP really adopting virtualization for all the deployments and the architectures for the various 5G flavors. So with that in mind, so we created the concept of SMART. SMART is an acronym we have within Boingo, which stands for Secure Networks, Multi-Platform, so it runs across multiple platforms, Analytics-driven, because we don't want to fly blind, and there's one thing is to go and deploy networks, but to maintain, manage, monitor, upgrade, break fix is completely a different story. Responsive, having that response automatically before the customers or the users come to know about it is actually very key, and it has to be tiered. So we have different class of services for different types of customers, for different venues, and so on and so forth. And we can achieve this only by virtualizing the infrastructure, which we've done many years back. Here's the pivot into Open Wi-Fi. So we embraced open standards right after we did virtualization. And the first thing that we embraced was the concept of open REST APIs. Most of, enterprise systems, they can be billing systems, OSS, BSS systems, Radius, authentication systems, finance systems, HR, so on and so forth. They weren't really open about 10, 15 years back. They were all closed systems with their own technologies and their concepts. And these enterprise systems started opening up by exposing a common REST API. So higher layers or any other communication systems can communicate via the API standards. The same concept happened from a RAN perspective, decoupling remote radio head and the baseband BBU hardware gave the birth for Open RAN. And of course, now the concept of Open Wi-Fi, you already heard from many of the speakers, so I'm not going to spend much, but basically using open standards between an AP and a controller. That controller can be a hardware controller. It can be virtualized on the cloud, which is most probably the latter. So that really allows for an end-to-end service provisioning and gives the power to go interoperable and mix and match different vendors and open the room for innovation. So at Boingo, we completely support this. We are actively part of many industry standard alliances, and Open Wi-Fi is something that we have started to fully embrace. And to recap again from the network infrastructure perspective, putting all of these concepts together, starting from the right. So we virtualize the infrastructure. We have used the concept of convergence and co-integration. So many of our networks now have Wi-Fi, CBRs, DAS, some of them including small cells, and managing the infrastructure from a holistic approach rather than individual separate boxes is something that we have focused for the past many, many years. Orchestrating all of these different components, be it a cloud controller, virtualized controller on the Open Wi-Fi, or be it managing different network function elements that are virtualized and containerized. Then moving on, containerizing and making them cloud native functions. And last but not the least is really the concept of security, which is becoming as a service, security as a service. And specifically, we're also focusing on SASE, which stands for Secure Applications Common Services Edge, because most of the applications are moving into the cloud, and having a common secure gateway and platform over there from that perspective is something key that we see. Okay, so a quick info on journey to virtualization. So we started virtualizing our backend systems, what we called as CMCS, our backend billing systems, and we started putting that to Amazon Web Services. We did that with our Radius and AAA. It's fully virtualized, and then our MEC is completely virtualized. Our cellular core function is virtualized. So when we bought in Open Wi-Fi and started working with all the vendors, Net Experience, of course, and EdgeCore and CIG and many of the vendors, because of the virtualization of our infrastructure, it was so easy to add a AP from EdgeCore or CIG, and all of our Radius is completely virtualized. So it was so easy for us to configure and get that up and running within like a day or two, which otherwise would have taken quite some time. And the other thing I want to highlight is when you make your infrastructure flexible, virtualize, containerize, and keep up with the standards, it also allows you to add things like AI and machine learning. For us, AI is really a two-step process. It's automated intelligence and artificial intelligence. So I would like to quote one example, and that is, typically when we deploy access points, Wi-Fi access points in airports, we have like one per gate in the gate area. And, when you have a flight that's where people are about to board in the flight, there's going to be close to 100 people or maybe more than 100 people seated over there. And many of them would be connected to one access point. So this access point, after a certain capacity, be it like 70%, 80%, or 90% capacity, may not function that well. It may not accept upcoming connections, or there could be performance issues. So we have AI scripts based on certain triggers and alerts. We either reboot the access point or we kill the stale connections before the users actually come to know about it. So we always try to automate this in the backend as much as possible, improving the network and the overall quality of experience from a user perspective. All right, and the other thing that I want to mention is we're talking about WCA and OpenWifi and TEP, and these are all industry-driven activities to bring the community together. Like Chetan mentioned, Chris and Chetan talked about it in the past. And at Boingo, we completely support that, and we are actually a very heavy proponent of different industry standard alliances. And as you can see in the slide, we've been actively participating at Wireless Broadband Alliance for more than 13 years now, or close to 14, I would say. And I've been involved in that like at least for 12 years. Wi-Fi Alliance and OnGo Alliance on the CBR side, Airport Council, where they talk about the airport standards and security. And of course, for the past 2 to 2.5 years, we've been very actively engaged in open converged wireless. I co-chaired with Chris from Facebook and Sasha from Deutsche Telekom. And, we are actively also involved in figuring out a way to bring open Wi-Fi into a commercial venue, because that's pretty much what we do. And there's, of course, several other industry standard alliances that we are part of. Okay, now let's get into the last two sections. Hopefully I'm good on time, but I just have 2 more slides, so I'll try to wrap this up quickly. So we have a lab within the Southern California area, and we have conducted a trial for the past, I would say, many months. And here's the overview of what we've done so far. So at Boingo Wireless, we have an external lab facility in North Hollywood, and we provided the entire infrastructure and the backhaul, including the virtualized radius servers for authentication and accounting. And the 2 items that we executed as part of the trial and the POC was Passpoint and Open Roaming, and we had the whole infrastructure for that. Facebook and TEP brought in Open Wi-Fi reference software. Passpoint and Open Roaming concepts were contributed to open source software, as most of you know. And the testing and verification was also, Facebook and TEP were also actively involved in that. And then NetExperience did provide the controller, virtualized cloud controller, Open Wi-Fi platform on which we ran the trial. And of course, they gave us the entire technical support throughout the process. And the vendors we used were CIG, EdgeCore, and TP-Link. And these are Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 6 APs. So we always try this in the lab. And as we're doing this in the lab, we will plan for deploying this in a couple of venues, which we are right now in the process. And hopefully in one of the next conferences, when we get a chance to speak, we will be talking about beyond the lab and where exactly we've deployed Open Wi-Fi. And the last thing, but really key thing is, okay, Kishore, you talked about all the different network infrastructure, Open Wi-Fi, virtualization. What are the use cases? Where do you guys plan to deploy? Then I realized, okay, how do I present this? Should I pick one use case or should I pick a group of use cases? Then I was like, you know what? I want to just pack them all. So if you can look at my slide now, we serve different types of venues. And as I mentioned, we have technologies in Wi-Fi, macro, DAS, Passpoint, and private LTE. And in many of these venues, we need a multitude of technologies to solve a particular use case or a group of use cases. So where would Open Wi-Fi be applicable? Well, it would be applicable in healthcare. in public venues, in transit hubs like the one in the San Francisco that we have deployed, manufacturing, office buildings, for a touchless experience, and bring your own devices and corporate connections and so on and so forth. Public safety type of deployment, having a dedicated, separate, maybe open Wi-Fi 6 private network, outdoor spaces, mobile Wi-Fi hotspots, as well as in large venues like stadiums and airports where you have thousands and thousands of people, coming at one point of time. Wi-Fi really augments with coverage and capacity, and things like with Passpoint and open roaming, it's seamless, secure, and with open Wi-Fi, you can literally have a virtualized experience, multi-vendor, as I talked about, being vendor agnostic, and really faster for innovation. That should hopefully conclude my slides, and hoping that gives a little bit context from a service provider perspective.
Kishore, thank you. That was pretty comprehensive. We have a handful of questions for you here. I'll see if I can get to a couple of them now, maybe a few at the end. What deployment hurdles does a convergence model help overcome?
Yeah, so as good as convergence and co-integration is, there's a lot of challenges that we had to go through, and it also enabled us into doing things that we could not do in the past. So before doing convergence, when we had to do post-deployment, I talked about 24/7 NOC, break fix, software upgrades, and monitoring. It was a painful process if you don't have one single pane of glass. Now, single pane of glass is an industry term a lot of us use. I don't think we're there completely yet, but I think from our perspective, we are definitely in the right path. And one of the biggest things that solved us from a hurdle perspective is we were able to, as much as possible, look at from one pane of glass the issues going on the Wi-Fi side, on the CBRS side, on the DAS side, and even on Wi-Fi from different venues perspective. Without that, it just would have been so much more challenging.
Thanks, Kishore. You referenced private networks, and we hear about 4G and 5G. Where do you see Wi-Fi's role in a 5G world?
Yeah, very good question, Tom. From my perspective, Wi-Fi really complements to where 5G is headed. And the reason I say that is, look at how many devices you have in Wi-Fi. Close to, I would say, about 10 to 15 billion devices right now on Wi-Fi. The market economy on Wi-Fi is close to $3 trillion. And I think it'll get to about 5 trillion in the next couple of years. There's a huge investment in Wi-Fi. Hundreds and thousands of Wi-Fi networks already available. And I can speak from US perspective. FCC also has a goal of reaching 800,000 small cells by the year 2026, and taking every single aspect, be it Wi-Fi or towers or private networks, is really part of the equation. And we strongly believe Wi-Fi complements to everything 5G is doing.
Thanks, Kishore. One other question that came from the audience asked if you can provide more detail on millimeter wave offerings coming out of Boingo.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, we work with the carriers. In all of these various venues that I talked about, we go and deploy a network infrastructure for the operators. And one of the first things that we do as part of that is we try to enable the different types of frequencies where the operators are ready to broadcast. That can be mid-band spectrum, low-band spectrum, and 5G millimeter wave. We have already deployed 5G millimeter wave in many of our venues, especially in concert arenas like the Live Nation venues that I talked about. We are also deploying a 5G services both in the mid-band and the millimeter wave in many of our public venues. So the number one goal, as I mentioned, is to enable it for the carriers. And then the number two is to do roaming across for different carriers, and then really enable the concept of private networks and neutral host. Of course, millimeter wave is not specifically for private networks, but from an overall spectrum perspective, so millimeter wave will stay for the carriers, and the mid-band and the low-band spectrum will be for private networks and the public in general.
Great. That was a fantastic talk, Kishore. We're going to move on, and we'll have some more questions for you at the end of the session. For now, we're going to move on to Open Wi-Fi updates, and we're going to hear from Chris and Iran. Wait, sorry. I jumped the gun. We're not going to hear from Chris and Iran. We're going to hear from Paul at Atlantis. Paul is joining us from Kenya today. And Paul, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Kishore. Great presentation. And thanks to WCA for inviting Atlantis along today. I'll be fairly brief around the project that we're deploying with NetExperience and with TIP and WCA into Africa. The first deployment of Open Wi-Fi in Africa. So my name's Paul Statham. I'm the commercial director for Atlantis here in Nairobi, Kenya. I'll just run through quickly who we are. Have a quick look at connectivity in Africa, where it's going, and very much a game of catch-up. So some technologies in mobile distribution that may be commonplace in the rest of the world are some way off in Africa. And then look at the voice of the customer. So why our customer looked at Open Wi-Fi, and then go into some details around that project, and then where we see the future Open Wi-Fi in Africa going. So Atlantis, for those of you who don't know Africa, we're on the blue side there. We operate in East Africa out of Nairobi, Kenya, but we support largely data center solutions in the East Africa region. So that's Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Malawi, Zambia, etc. We're supporting some big brands, both in terms of their global coverage and also their African coverage. And we're a systems integrator and a cloud service provider. And our cloud service journey really has defined why we're now very much an open systems integrator. So we're a member of the OpenWifi project, we're a member of the Telco Infra project, and very much looking forward to distributing our skills across the last mile in Open Wi-Fi. We're 10 years old, and we're looking forward to the next 10 years in a different way. Traditionally, we've been very much in the old systems integration space with the likes of Oracle, Dell, Cisco, HP, etc., etc. But on our journey to build our own cloud, we came across the Facebook-inspired OpenWifi project, and then that took us down further journeys into TIP and very much part of the Open Wi-Fi. So just to touch on the mobile market here and understand where we think Wi-Fi has a massive point to play. And to Kishore's point, alongside 5G, then it's very complementary. But we can also see Wi-Fi in Africa extending the last mile quite dramatically. So on that top left-hand diagram, then we'll just see the distribution of mobile technologies. And obviously we're way behind the rest of the world. In 4 years' time, we're anticipating only about 3% of access to be across 5G. So the big drive in the next few years is expansion of the 4G network. And there's very obvious reasons for that in terms of ARPU and return on investment in that investment for the mobile network operators. So there's a massive play there for Wi-Fi, and particularly Open Wi-Fi, in being able to extend the network to a relatively low disposable income mobile user base. That, on the other hand, Sub-Saharan Africa will add 120 new subs in that same time period. Now, some of that's population growth. We're a population of about 1.3 billion, which will grow between 200 and 300 million in the next period, but also an emerging middle class and wealth in the Sub-Saharan African region. And then the last slide there, really on the right, is the growth of use of mobile data, which is extremely low compared to the rest of the world, but the growth rates are quite dramatic. And there's also expectation that ownership of smartphones as the access device to the internet will grow dramatically in the same time period. So what we're really saying here is it's a low market by comparison to the rest of the world. However, it's growing quite dramatically. So I'll talk about the customer here who has had experience of the traditional OEMs on the left and some of their experiences in why they're looking to go to Open Wi-Fi. And there's many good reasons. I think we've looked already around how the disaggregation of hardware and software can lead to much lower CapEx and OpEx in terms of the total cost of ownership of owning Wi-Fi devices. And believe me, Africa is incredibly entrepreneurial. And there have been so many different models tried to monetize Wi-Fi on the continent, but none have really succeeded. And I know Kishore is sitting on a business that has succeeded in the monetization of Wi-Fi, but it's not really happened in Africa. And many of those reasons are the incredibly high CapEx and OpEx, which leads to a lack of budgetary control for the budget owners. We have found that the training is often sourced from overseas and is quite locked in, likes of Cisco Wi-Fi, Meraki Wi-Fi, etc., etc. That training is difficult, and it's not a great asset to have for an individual. What we're looking at with Net Experience is a much more open environment that is democratizing Wi-Fi to many degrees, and that so many people, and there's a lot of talent coming out of African schooling system around IT, can access it and develop and be part of it. Development is a really interesting point with the Net Experience platform, open APIs. Again, very entrepreneurial culture across all African countries that can get a lot more resources into the system, developing applications. We are the home in Kenya of M-Pesa, the most successful mobile money network and application in the world by many counts. And we believe that with an open Wi-Fi network, then we can get those same resources and the understanding of challenges that probably are quite unique to Africa to develop further applications around that. Licensing has been a big challenge, particularly with this customer. They were granted a network of Wi-Fi access points from a traditional OEM through an NGO. But when it came to year two, the NGO funding wasn't there. And the cost of licensing was not only a massive bill shock, it was also quite complicated to understand, but it actually made that network unsustainable. There was a cost that hadn't been budgeted for, that was unexpected, and it was unsustainable. So as you'll see on the left, this customer has actually gone across the campus that we're deploying in. They have a Cisco deployment, they have an HP deployment, they have a Ubiquiti deployment, none of which they can operate anymore because of the support contracts and the support costs. And that leads to my next point around vendor lock-in. You're locked into those environments, and you either continue to fund them and then develop and create what we call a technical debt, that your year-on-year OpEx already has a line item in it in supporting those items. And that lock-in is not desirable at all. And what we're finding already with the Open Wi-Fi model is hardware and software completely disaggregated. So when it comes to next year and they want to expand their Wi-Fi network by another 1,000 access points, we're not locked into a conversation with the likes of HP of getting another 1,000 that works on their system. It's completely open. And that gives the buyer a lot more power in those negotiations. And it's really finding the best fit rather than being stuck with what was the best fit last year. And that interoperability is absolutely crucial. And I'll go on to show that how we're doing that in this initial deployment. But that final point on the right there, project failures. All the three vendors on the left have led to project failures and just left legacy systems that are not good for the operators or indeed the consumers, which are ultimately students of the university. So the project that we're deploying is across a campus in Nairobi, and really some of the educational and human drivers around it are linked to COVID and trying to disseminate the points of learning for the students. So rather than convening in classrooms or in libraries, then the content is distributed across a Wi-Fi network that is accessible in different areas of the campus, whether that be in the halls of residence or whether that be in common rooms where not so many people will be convened together. And the solution that we've gone for with the support of TIP and Net Experience and the hardware vendors is really quite exciting for the customer. Again, completely disaggregated. So we're going to implement 100 CIG outdoor access points, 100 HFCL outdoor access points, with the commonality of the Net Experience software as a service across that. We'll be utilizing open switches through EdgeCore, which Atlantis have also been deploying in data centers at top of rack and working very well with EdgeCore, a great contributor to the open community. As I say, 200 open Wi-Fi access points, covering an area of around about 5 square kilometers, and the Net Experience software as a service. So going back to the previous slide, why did the university go with open Wi-Fi? Much lower and much more predictable total cost of ownership. Their software support costs are with them already. Their costs of acquiring new access points are with them already. And that's around about a 50% saving versus some very heavily discounted OEM business models from some of the vendors that were mentioned on the previous slide. They're extremely excited about the manageability through the Net Experience interface of the hardware. I think, as Hugh said, most of the problems, 95% will be software related. The hardware is easily replaceable. We're holding hot spares on site for the client. And it gives them a great platform for future expansion. And as I said, also gives them a great negotiating position in terms of talking to the hardware vendors when the next requirement comes up. So our customer is basically manages 90 universities in terms of their backhaul and their last mile connectivity across Kenya. So for us, we're really excited to be part of the first open Wi-Fi deployment in Africa. We very much look forward to working with Net Experience in building a localized software as a service hosting on our cloud, and aim to build up to an access point base of around about 10,000 in the foreseeable future. And being part of that global community that will allow us to harness the talent that exists in Africa, that's coming out of the African secondary and tertiary education, that is quite often blocked by the inhibiting costs of being a Cisco certified engineer or whatever. And with open source, we feel there's much more opportunity, particularly in the university environment that we're deploying to harness and capture some of that talent, to localize it, to challenge it with some of the challenges that are quite uniquely African, and ultimately be a contributor to the global community. And then some of our data center implementations around open compute are very much in the largest mobile operators within Africa. And then we're looking forward to, again, working in a community that I must say is a breath of fresh air, having worked with some of the OEMs over the past 30 years in my career, to now be working with open organizations that are open very much in their culture, in their transparency, and in the people that we're working with to deliver solutions that ultimately, I think us as IT professionals is why we got into the industry in the first place, which is to use technology to move businesses, to move organizations, and to move communities forward in a very positive way. So for further information, there's our website. Thank you for your time and welcome any questions.
Paul, thanks. This is really exciting.
Yeah.
As you know, here you've had an industry in the university market that was literally stagnant. It couldn't move forward. There were too many barriers to entry and cost implications and economic challenges. And here, Atlantis came in, worked with the Open Wi-Fi team, and has managed to carve a path forward in this market. So that's really exciting. And you know, I can think of dozens of potential industries, not necessarily in Africa, but dozens of industries that this could really benefit. But more locally, what's the status? This is your first installation. What's the status of the project right now? Have you started going through installation? When do you expect to go live, etc.?
Absolutely. So we are building the passive infrastructure at the moment. It's a very tree-lined university. So we're using fiber for the backhaul. That's being built at the moment. We're expecting delivery of the access points within November and hope to go live by the start of the next university term in January 2022.
That's awesome. And Atlantis has sort of run the gamut. You know, you started as a traditional SI with the traditional services from people like Oracle, etc., and now you've moved into connectivity. Where do you see your opportunities moving forward besides education?
We are very focused on the service provider market. As I said, we've just signed a 5-year framework agreement for data center activity with one of the biggest telcos on the continent. We see open compute, open networking as being absolutely on point for Africa. With the greatest respect to the rest of the world, products are designed largely with large Western enterprises and service providers in mind. Open compute, open networking, open Wi-Fi is incredibly flexible and allows us to develop and add value to bespoke products that can be tailored to the African market, which is different, and it needs that kind of focus. It's not a cookie cut from American or Western European market. It's a unique market, and with the disaggregation of hardware and software that is very much at the heart of the open philosophy, then we can start building hardware that suits the market, does not overspec, and then the software, as ever, is the magic and is the value.
That's great. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. That's a really great story, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
My pleasure, Tom.
Back to the agenda, we're going to talk about open Wi-Fi updates. And this time, I promise we're going to have Iran and Chris back. And so, gentlemen.
Maybe I'll just share my screen. Be easier.
Yes, we can see it. Thanks, Iran. Can
you see my screen?
We can.
Great. So I'll talk a little bit about the hardware. So as we said, we have a disaggregated network here that we're building. And what we have right now is we have Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6, and Wi-Fi 6E is in development. And we expect Wi-Fi 6E to come on board sometimes during Q1. We have about 24 different SKUs and adding SKUs monthly, if not quarterly, if not monthly. And you can see on the bottom different companies, CIG, who is a sponsor of WCA, and we thank them very much for giving us the opportunity here, and TP-Link and EdgeCore and Molistech, and even more. And when we say this disaggregation, the disaggregation that we're talking about, then I would just want to open up a small parentheses, and a few people here have already addressed it, the supply chain. The last 2 years have shown us that our supply chains are fragile. They're not always there when we need them. And this kind of disaggregation, where every access point basically presents themselves in the same way to the cloud, and can talk with any cloud controller of the OpenWifi ecosystem, helps many people, helps many network providers to deploy their networks, even if there is a shortage somewhere. And I can even say that between companies inside the ecosystem, they're already starting to talk. Oh, you have a little bit more of this chip. Maybe you can lend it to me, and I'll give you back in a couple of months when I get this chip. So it starts to work really nicely together. And if you look, there's this kind of pie chart that I pulled off the internet. Communication is about a third of the chips worldwide. So whenever something happens in the silicon industry, communication is going to suffer. It doesn't really matter what happens. Communications is going to suffer. So we're right in the midst of this kind of silicon supply chain that now is turning into a chip packaging supply chain. And I've even heard about aluminum shortages for the heat sinks. So everything is kind of wobbly there. And in addition to that, the fabs now prefer to manufacture for automotive because there's more or less the same process nodes as Wi-Fi 5. So the fabs prefer to sell 1 square millimeter of silicon for 3 times the price, because that's what the automotive guys pay, instead of selling this for Wi-Fi 5. So I believe that very, very soon we see a strong push for Wi-Fi 6. So basically, the OpenWifi ecosystem enables to create a mix and match of ODMs, different SKUs, different silicon, different cloud providers, whatever makes things work, and at a lower cost, where there's an inherent supply chain resilience. And as the ecosystem grows, this resilience will just get better and better. So what do we have today? We have Wi-Fi 5, 6, and 6E coming up. For Wi-Fi 5, when we started, we just used whatever was off the shelf, didn't ask for any changes on the hardware, and just brought it up with the OpenWRT software, the OpenWifi AP NOS. When we went into Wi-Fi 6, we made some minimal changes, something in a little bit addition in the memory sometimes, and we see this right now ramping up as the mainstream hardware. And for Wi-Fi 6E, we've actually already special SKUs like that SKU that's coming up by CIG, which is a 4x4, 3 times triple band, 4x4, 2.45 gig, and 6E, 6 gig band. And as a timeline, Q1 2021 was when all the Wi-Fi 5 was more or less ready. Q2 2021, when we launched Wi-Fi 6, became ready, and we just added SKUs over the time. Right now with Wi-Fi 6E, we're in software development. Wi-Fi 6, there's still some addition coming, because we see the market is asking for all kinds of low-cost APs here, more enterprise related APs in other places, and ODMs are coming up with more solutions, and we see that it makes sense to just add them to the mix. The two main chip vendors that we have right now on board is Qualcomm and MediaTek. We are talking with practically everybody who makes Wi-Fi chips to come and join the ecosystem, and I hope that we will have a third one very, very soon. The main ODMs that we're working right now are listed above. Many of you know some of them or all of them. And we're adding ODMs also periodically. So just to see kind of a summary of what is existing. So we have seating and wall mount access points, wall plates, outdoor access points, and also desk, the regular desk type that you would see in a home. And I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, and you will see it later when you can download this presentation. There is a lot of Wi-Fi 2x2 SKUs because there's a big demand for those, and we even have a couple of CPEs there, and the 2 CPEs, 5 outdoor, 17 indoor, which is a quite nice offering of 24 different SKUs that are all work great within the OpenWifi ecosystem and all being tested in our test lab all the time. Another addition that we're starting to add right now is, and working on right now, is starting to add switches, so that basically the network is kind of a end-to-end solution, so to say. The same software will control the switches and the access points. It's going to be the same, one pane of glass. There is one older revision, which is like a 1 gigabit switch, and then there's a new revision, that's a 2.5 gigabit switch that also provides more power for the upcoming more power-hungry APs, especially the 12-chain APs and up. And we hope to see them start to see them in Q1 2022. These are right now by EdgeCore, but there will be additional ones next year as things evolve. Chris, to you.
Thanks, Eran. So I think that moves us through, again, it is kind of a catch moment, right? When you think about how much flexibility exists in the stack, just in terms of platform. As Eran showed, 24 SKUs and counting, many ODM partners, more coming. It's just a tremendously healthy ecosystem. On top of all of that, in direct effect here is how do you run that so fast, if you will? We talked earlier about when the program launched and certainly when partners began to be able to deploy. And it comes by being able to apply this common disaggregated architecture across that sort of cloud to ground model. So to that end, over in the cloud, there are a family of microservices that make up what's called the TIP SDK. And that family is really, it's something a la carte. There's the opportunity to use as much or as little as your particular cloud need may describe. Commercial folks who are coming with an existing cloud may not need all of the services that TIP offers and may only need a couple of them in order to launch into service. And then we offer more in case there's a desire for additional functionality from the open source stack. The ways in and out of that stack, fairly straightforward, fairly expected. We have an OpenAPI compliant RESTful interface. Kishore mentioned that earlier, right? Part of the ability to delayer a back office and achieve virtualization is to get into a paradigm where effectively the network becomes programmable, and you can get that tighter coupling between the network, its service, and the OSS back office serving it when you do have well-defined interfaces that are open. And so we have that open API experience as a result to increase the velocity of integration and lower the barrier therein. There is also for those looking to enrich, let's say, data analytics tooling or to create certain visualizations of the movement of subscribers and data in the network, the opportunity to consume vast amounts of data from the enterprise message bus that's presented from the SDK. And then, of course, there is a UI. And being a model-driven architecture, the UI is using the exact same open API for any of its functionality that it presents. And so folks may use the UI from open source or may certainly use their own commercial user interface, right, to bring that branded experience forward. Speaking down from the cloud to the device, in our current architecture, we leverage the uCentral management plane and interface that comes from the OpenWRT folks in open source. And then that speaks into the nightly built device images from TIP. A lot of functionality that's built into those images. We start with a 21.x release of OpenWRT, so latest Linux kernel, all of the latest CVE patches, obviously. So really the most modern implementation of WRT that you can imagine. This also means that we have some of the best of the Linux networking stack offered by the kernel available to us in OpenWifi. And to that end, then there are additional TIP-specific features that are brought in during the nightly builds that give opportunity to support native compliance for open roaming passpoint services that allow for that seamless mobility from RAN to indoor, from the mobile to the Wi-Fi service. All of that's possible because of the work done here in the embedded firmware stack, if you will, from TIP. And the partners. There are a lot of great additional features. Really encourage folks that are interested to have a deep look at what's available, both in cloud and in device. There are a great many things that have been thought of in terms of how to do zero-touch provisioning, cloud discovery at scale, the ability to support mesh and WDS topologies. A lot of things that you would expect from any tier one commercial type vendor, you'll find, generally speaking, here in OpenWifi. So when we look at how does this come together? How does the community build this, or what is the day-to-day for the community? Well, we sort of set ourselves up as a virtual Wi-Fi OEM. Most of the folks that are in the team, we all come from the industry. We've sort of done this sort of thing before. So we wanted to really bring some tooling that every developer, every product manager, every role from the industry would be familiar with. And so there's some very common names here. We have essentially a nightly integration environment where as code is checked in and merged from developers around the community, that's all handled through source control using GitHub. The GitHub actions are then firing off nightly builds that are ultimately produced into a system called JFrog, where that system is then picked up by our automation scripts in QA tooling, where nightly builds are then applied across TIP Community Lab, where a couple of dozen RF chambers are set up to exercise over 1,500 automated sanity tests against every nightly build. Details of what's in a test or what a new feature may contain, and we try to use Confluence as a common source wiki information area for everything that's going on in that sense. We also use Jira to track bugs and Slack for developers to be able to have easy communication among the team. So there's a lot of tools that go into this, and this is really trying to lower the barrier for folks to be able to consume, learn, and contribute therein. This is a great eye chart, and certainly we could say there'd be a test later, but this will be recorded and the charts will be available for everyone. Just a quick summary, though, for folks that are wondering, if I have my insert vendor X device and I really depend on a certain special feature that I think is highly relevant from that vendor. Will I find that over in TIP Open Wi-Fi? We think predominantly the answer is yes. You more than likely will find what you're looking for already today in TIP Open Wi-Fi. But if you're not, refer back to the previous slides where the development community can get around whatever that gap might be and bring that incremental feature add to the stack. But there's a tremendous amount of goodness we think already in play. This is only focusing at the device firmware level. There's a whole other view of this that talks about what happens up in the cloud as well. Really encourage folks to, again, look at what you're seeking to deploy, what you might depend on based on your network, your topology, your user, your business, and you're likely to find what you're looking for in the stack today. A little bit of where we've been this year and where we're going into next year. We brought forward our 2.x architecture. We've brought on many more devices as a result to the community. We have a much lower footprint in terms of firmware size on the device, memory need on the devices, and so forth. The ability to bring in now some new programmable data planes has become possible. The ability to support some fairly interesting integrations in both back office terms and as well as in subscriber service terms are now starting to tease out. We think that there are some new functionalities looking a little bit forward that operators, you heard Kishore mention, running the Super Bowl network every day is what they do at Boingo. And there's a need to have great flexibility to not just support the Super Bowl network today, but the Super Bowl network every day to come. And so part of what we've been investing in this programmable data plane is we're tying that together with work that you heard Iran mention around 6 gigahertz and eventually Wi-Fi 7 as well, that will allow us to get into a place where we can have dynamic airtime control, we can influence bandwidth per subscriber that's associated, not just in a per access point basis, but in a topology end-to-end manner. And eventually get to a future state that is more about network slicing for Wi-Fi as a service, where the service follows the customer from the network's perspective rather than the customer trying to follow the network. So we really think that's a future lean forward event that we think Open Wi-Fi can help participate in. Definitely want to leave folks with this message before we break away, and that is we really believe in a well-curated stack. Quality is at the top of our North Star. Mentioned earlier that the nightly builds, when they're contributed in, those are all pulled through automation and deployed across 24 RF chambers that are in the community lab. There's a whole battery of tests that occur, and then the results are openly published into those Confluence wiki pages in our QA section. So we'll do the nightly tests. There's dashboards for that. We'll also do release tests at the end of every sprint that we run in 1-month intervals, and all of the data that we've been able to gather, report on is, again, it's all published into our open dashboards for the community to see. And so with that, we really do thank you so much for, well, 1, for your deployments of Open Wi-Fi, obviously. 2, for your interest in the solution, certainly. And we really would encourage folks to consider joining us and making an impact in deploying this democratized world of TIP Open Wi-Fi. Please consider joining the PG if you haven't already. And if you're interested just in consuming, you're more than welcome. And if you also are interested in contributing, you're also very, very welcome to join. So again, thanks so much to everyone for your time today. We look forward to seeing you in the project group. Thank you.
Chris and Iran, thanks for the presentation. Chris, one quick question. Can you elaborate more on network slicing / Wi-Fi as a service?
Certainly. I think that, there's features we've sort of just finished putting in to TIP Open Wi-Fi, things like radius assigned dynamic VLANs or radius assigned bandwidth profiles in uplink and downlink. And those are great as indicators to the access point alone, as to on any individual customer when they associate what type of a service should that access point provide them. The thing is that behind every great wireless network is a wired infrastructure supporting it. And so communicating that policy only into the access point is really only doing the first job in what we view as an end-to-end requirement to really create that subscriber service across the topology for the operator. You heard Kishore mention that from the SASE edge, right, all the way to the access point at the airport gate is the domain of basically what counts in my terminology. And we see that, as you can note, we have PoE access switching coming into the portfolio, as Aran showed, the opportunity to be able to create an end-to-end view that has latency guarantees, bandwidth guarantees, and is able to return telemetry up to the cloud that demonstrates each subscriber's service, and in a closed-loop fashion, be able to tell the network operator how that service is doing. That's what we really think network slicing is, or Wi-Fi as a service is, looking a little bit forward.
Thank you, Chris. One question that came up, Iran, and then we're going to get to our raffle winners and then come back to questions, is are there special tip SKUs that are pretty generically Wi-Fi only, or do you see them coming where they'll support IoT radios, Zigbee, Thread, Bluetooth radios, etc.?
Many of the SKUs, of course, support Zigbee and Bluetooth, or only Bluetooth sometime. But the IoT chips inside a Wi-Fi access point is becoming something that is commonly there. So most of the SKUs have some type of Bluetooth or Zigbee or both.
Perfect. Thanks. We're going to come back to open this up for questions. But since we just went over our limit, I did want to announce some winners for the raffle, the access points, the open Wi-Fi access points, and the service for a year from Net Experience. And so a couple of points. If the winners can, in a chat window, send me a chat with your addresses, we can ship this stuff to you. That would be great. Or send me an email at tom.hunt@wca.org with your mailing address so we can ship these devices to you. So the first winner is Glenn Simon. Glenn, congratulations. Second winner is Jim Warner. Congratulations, Jim. The third winner is Edwin Tanby. Edwin, congratulations. Fourth winner, we've never had 4 winners before, or 5 winners. We only have 1. This is great. Kenneth Fernandez. Congratulations, Kenneth. And our final winner is Bob Stillerman. Congratulations, Bob. So we have 5 winners and 5 access points. Thank you again to CIG. Thank you again to Net Experience for providing those services. As Peter mentioned earlier on, all of these presentations and video of the event will be available on the WCA website in 48 hours. That's WCA.org. And so at this point, I'd like to open it up for some questions. Any questions from the group? So I have one question coming in online. AT&T and Xfinity seem to offer similar solutions to Open Wi-Fi. Are they members of the TIP Open Wi-Fi Alliance? I'll throw that out to the group.
I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
I wasn't sure if you were back, Chetan. So please go ahead.
All right. Yeah, we probably have 2 different. Probably have some complementary perspectives to add. Hey, Tom, without the permission of some members, we are unable to share the names officially. But what we can say is that we've been talking to all the major players in the industry, including Comcast and AT&T and others, and there's been some expression of interest in Open Wi-Fi from all of the major players. That's about what, unfortunately, the rules of the organization allow me to share at this point. But to the larger point, I don't believe that there's anything equivalent of this with either organization. I could be wrong, but they are interested in promoting some level of interoperability between their products. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything further to that.
Well said. Absolutely.
Okay. We have some other questions. Some folks had questions regarding Wi-Fi slicing and future LTE and Wi-Fi integration. No specific question there, but would anybody like to talk about the integration? I know, Kishore, you spoke to this a little earlier, but LTE and Wi-Fi integrations, can we elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that Chris talked about in the list of items on the roadmap is, this is going to be not just open Wi-Fi, but it's going to be open converged wireless. So which means bringing in cellular, bringing in a component of CBRS, potentially IoT, and so on and so forth. So because the goal is really to have a open converged deployment and platform. We start with Wi-Fi because that's where the standards and the initiation started. And we are now planning as we speak to how do we expand this into multiple heterogeneous wireless technologies so these can converge as one platform.
Thank you. Anybody else like to weigh in there? Okay. Another question from the audience. On the residential side, there's a drive for USP TRO 369 management. On the large enterprise side, for example, Google, there is a push for openconfig.apis. Can you comment on the support now or in the future for USP TRO 369 and OpenConfig?
Sure, I can certainly lean in there.
Thanks, Chris.
On the USP side, the Broadband Forum folks have a good set of standards that really do address the residential market quite well. What you'll most often find, though, is that the ACS infrastructures today, they're not fundamentally suited to WLAN controllers. The functions and the characteristics of essentially what a WLAN controller does go a lot further than doing just basic device provisioning, if you will, at scale. There is a lot of goodness, certainly in the Broadband Forum standards around Wi-Fi. There's absolutely no doubt there. But there are a number of things that go around service assurance, subscriber mobility, roaming handoff, and a lot more advanced topology concerns that tie together with that subscriber and security and how they are authenticating into the network that are simply not addressed in those other standards. And then over on the Google side, it's just OpenConfig as a general schema, a Yang-based schema. That's saying there's a data model that has a whole variety of potential device support, very much in provisioning terms. And there certainly is an ability to stream data as well from an OpenConfig perspective. But again, you would need to start first with what is the WLAN controller architecture as it might relate to that interface standard. And so in the absence of any, our OpenWifi cloud infrastructures implement, certainly in 1.x terms, an OpenSync-based interface to that end, and in 2.x terms, the uCentral-based interface to that end. And so that's where we are today.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see. We had one other question regarding, this is probably you as well, Chris. People were trying to understand the genesis of where the OpenWifi 1.0 component came from. Was it an existing code base offered up by some of the early participants, or was it a brand new start from scratch initiative?
Yeah, we put together a few good folks. So it was, you could say it was it was a lot of existing code base that came together into really make out this disaggregated architecture. And so in one sense, you had in the basis in the device level base, there was the OpenWRT operating system, one actor in the model. Then there was early work from NetExperience around what would the Cloud SDK have the ability to do? And then in between was defining that management and telemetry interface, similar to the last question we were just talking about. And that management telemetry interface in 1.x came in from the OpenSync project, the open source part of Plume's offering. So it's sort of the genesis of those three actors coming together that we forged to create the initial TIP OpenWifi design with, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Chris. It does. And then we have one other question here right now. How does the compliance program work for OpenWifi certification?
That's a great question. I'll ask Aran Dor if he wouldn't mind speaking to that.
Yeah, so the Wi-Fi TIP and the Wi-Fi project group, they provide logos for tested hardware and some tested software as well. And there is a set of basic tests that we basically make sure that the hardware and the embedded software work as a system together and are reliable and have all a minimum set of features that we would like to see and that we would like to have, or that basically every network provider would like to see and would like to have. And once these work, the vendor of the hardware gets the logo and is then approved. We are right now in the final stages of approving that process, and once this process is there will be a TIP exchange site, where on this TIP exchange site, all the hardware that was tested and that has this logo will be there, and people can just go to these companies and buy the hardware from them, knowing that this was tested, it's okay, it works, and there's nothing to worry about. Just one maybe little thing that we didn't say during these pieces earlier is that the goal of TIP is to provide deployable products. It's not like other organizations that provide documentation, standards, stuff like that. The goal is to really provide the deployable products, and this is really important to understand, because these are deployable products. These are the products that you can just buy from the vendor, deploy, talk with the cloud provider, and say, okay, let's connect and let's make it work. Let's have a network.
Thank you, Iran. I think so. A follow-on to that is: so does the community member carry out the testing at the community labs or at a member location? Iran, did you get that?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Oh, sorry. Follow-on question was: do community members carry out the testing at a community lab or at a member location?
All the testing is being done right now in a community lab that we have in Fremont. The testing is done by personnel that works for TIP or Facebook TIP right now. But the community labs are in a way open because of COVID-19, not really, but the idea at the end is so that every vendor, every participant in the project group could reserve a test chamber that they want for a certain amount of time with some equipment that they want to test, and just run those tests and for themselves. They don't need to share those tests when they run it for themselves, and debug whatever things they have to debug, and then go into this logoing process once they're ready for it.
Thank you, Iran. That's great information. That concludes our session today. We had a full event. We ran over by almost 20 minutes, and I want to thank each of our panelists for providing such informative and relevant information on where Open Wi-Fi is and what's going on in the world of Open Wi-Fi. It was great to hear about some deployments and how this industry is really coming together around this solution. So thank you to all of our panelists. As we mentioned earlier, we will be posting the video as well as all the presentation materials on the WCA website, wca.org. Special thanks to Evelyn Chu from CIG, who did the intro video that you saw announcing the event. Hollywood is missing out on an amazing talent with Evelyn. So thank you, Evelyn. And we hope to see you all at our next event next month. And if anybody has any closing comments, now's the time. Otherwise, thank you all for participating, and we'll see you next time.